Are we all ready? Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Well, once again, I am here to address the state budget impasse. And frankly, as I was thinking about what to say to all of you today, I was a bit conflicted because I think there has been so much rhetoric in the past year, so many things that have been said that frankly I think we're becoming somewhat numb to the words that we hear on all this. But at the same time, it would be negligent of me to talk about our state's predicament without reminding everyone involved of the severe and real ramifications of the inaction that we see in Springfield. Because the facts are that our social service network is being torn apart, that our most vulnerable residents are losing critical services, that our colleges and universities, many of them, are on the verge of collapse, and that businesses and organizations throughout our state are being forced into mass layoffs that leave families with no way to meet their financial obligations. All of this is happening because leadership in Springfield has refused to pass a budget, and that's unconscionable. So while it may sound like more rhetoric to some of you, it cannot be said enough for those who are living it. So today I am really here to deliver the news that payments will stop when we enter the new fiscal year on July 1st if we do not take some action in Springfield. And worse, businesses and organizations that have signed contracts that have provided services in good faith to the state this year face the real possibility of having to go to court in order to get paid in the absence of a stopgap budget. And this is inevitably going to cost taxpayers of Illinois even more in legal fees. Now, over the past year, my office has been able to continue a number of payments under special appropriations that were passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor. Specifically, there were 4 bills that authorized the state to spend $23 billion, and these expire at the end of this month. Those impacted our schools. There was $13.7 billion that was authorized this year for K through 12 education and teacher pension payments. If a similar bill is not passed, this summer schools across our state will face the real prospect of not opening. Second, our 911 call centers, local governments, domestic violence shelters. The General Assembly and the governor authorized $3.1 billion in spending in these areas last December. It also included payments to our lottery winners. After a half a year of these payments, these services and organizations will once again go without state funding if no action is taken in Springfield. Third are those who rely on federal dollars. Now, last August, our state appropriated $5.4 billion in federal spending for low-income energy assistance program, children's nutrition programs, public health services like cancer screenings, AIDS and HIV prevention, and home-delivered meals for seniors. Payments for each of these programs will stop unless the General Assembly acts within the next 3 weeks. And finally, our colleges and universities and MAP grant students. They went nearly a full year without any state funding. And higher education institutions and students were finally given some temporary relief back in April through a $600 million appropriation that was passed. Now, this $600 million in stopgap funding was $1.3 billion less than what they received last year. And so far, we've already spent over 80% of that. I did direct my staff to expedite and prioritize those payments that went out to the students who were waiting for MAP grant funding, and also to the higher education institutions that were most in need: Chicago State, Northeastern, Eastern, and Western Illinois universities. As a result, those universities have already received their full appropriations. And with respect to the students who wait for student MAP grants, the MAP grant funding that was appropriated covered only half a year. And that means the college students are still promised funding for their spring semester. If we do not pass funding related to this, many will not be able to return to classes in the fall until new legislation is signed. Now, it's important to note that if you combine this year's higher education shortage with what is needed in the coming year to match fiscal 15 funding levels for higher education, the state is currently shorting our colleges, universities, and students waiting for MAP grants a staggering $3.2 billion. These are the challenges of not passing a budget for the next fiscal year. But it doesn't end there. The state also has a moral and legal obligation to clean up the mess that it created by not having a budget this fiscal year. Because even without an appropriation, there have been businesses and organizations all throughout the state that have provided the state with goods and services in good faith on contracts they signed pending a budget, and they believe that they should be paid when an agreement is reached. Now, the fact is that right now in our office, we have more than 5,000 state contracts that have been filed with my office. They total a total of $899 million, nearly $1 billion in spending. And they're being held because there is no way to legally make a payment on any of these contracts. This is our totally unfunded part of the government right now. Now, some of these contracts are not being utilized, which means that no expense has been incurred on them, but the majority of them have been in use. And without a budget, those businesses and organizations that have been serving the state in good faith run the risk of having no choice but to go to court in order to get paid. Now, we're talking here about human services and social service providers, state prison and veterans home vendors, IT companies, landlords for state buildings and facilities, local utility providers that have been left without payment because Springfield has failed to do its job. In a normal year, any unpaid vendor would go to the Court of Claims to compel payment from the state. But without an appropriation, the Court of Claims is not an option. There's no legal recourse, and vendors face being left without a payment. Their only recourse would be then to sue the state, much like we saw last month when a coalition of 82 human and social service providers filed suit with the state to be paid more than $130 million in services that they provided this past year, meaning that even more taxpayer dollars go into legal battles instead of funding the critical services of the state. These self-inflicted traumas are unacceptable, they're unnecessary, and they must end now. Now, as I've said a number of times, I don't have a vote in the General Assembly. I cannot compel anyone to pass or sign legislation. But as the state's chief fiscal officer, I constantly remind everyone that I have a very large megaphone that goes with being the comptroller. And I continue to try and use it to let everyone know the ramifications of running our state without a budget. So let me be completely clear. This budget stalemate is causing irreparable harm to the very people and organizations that our government exists to serve. The best thing that we can do is to have our leaders, Springfield, pass a balanced budget that addresses the holes in this year's budget and have them come together on a spending plan for next year so that those who rely on government can plan for the year ahead as we require in our Constitution. And at the very least, our state owes it to the taxpayers of Illinois to pass funding that allows our schools to open, that ensures our vendors are paid for services that they have already provided, and that will help keep critical state government operations running. It is long past time for all involved to put the best interests of the state over politics. And as always, my office stands ready to assist in whatever resources, whatever help we can provide that will help move the discussion ahead and get us a solution and a budget in place. So thank you. Now I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Comptroller, you said there are irreparable harm. What is going to be harmed irreparably, specifically?
Well, we have social service organizations right now that have shuttered services, closed down portions of services, laid off employees. When those employees are laid off, many of them go find other jobs, and they leave. Many of them in your border areas are leaving the state. We have businesses that are going out of business because the state owes them money. I receive phone calls from medical care providers who have gone 2 years without payment from the state, who are risk losing their businesses because the state is so behind in making payments. We have vendors that provide critical services, food, for example, to our correctional centers. They have not been paid all year. They can no longer provide the food, and they are risking seeing their businesses go under. So there are a number of services and organizations around the state that are being hurt without a budget in place.
Ms. Munger?
Without an education budget, you mentioned if there's not one by the end of the month, does that mean teachers' pensions, like the Illinois teachers' retirement system, won't be paid?
Yes, so the funding that has to be in place, the funding that was passed last year, that has allowed us to keep the schools open all year and to fund the teachers' retirement plan, was part of that $13.7 billion that was funded. That is part of a standalone bill now that could be passed to help keep all those in place, but it has to be voted out.
Would they have a
What about the
Sounds
other
as though
pensions, though? The other three pensions?
The other pensions are part of a continuing appropriation. They are funded even in the absence of a budget. They've been paid all year, and currently we are up to date on the contributions into the pension fund for all the other state plans.
Should the turnaround agenda be forgotten about now at this point?
I believe that the governor has already put aside some of the things he's asked for in discussion with the stopgap budget. I will tell everyone again, as the state controller, I look at these numbers every single day. We have debt so high right now that we cannot simply raise taxes enough. It's just mathematically not going to work. We'd be looking at a tax increase somewhere around 8% to take our taxes up from where they are now up to about 8% just to get out of the bills that we have in-house today. So the thought that we can simply raise taxes alone is not a solution to get us to a balanced budget. And the longer we go on without a budget that's balanced, we simply increase the amount of time
So what do we
it
do?
takes to have bills. We cannot cut our way out of this. There's too much money. We can cut some, but we cannot solve this simply on cuts. So we need, I have said this routinely throughout the year, I believe we need a three-pronged approach. We need to make our government more efficient. We need things that will take cost out of how we run our government. There are a lot of ideas that have come up. The governor's talked about procurement reform as an example. My office is leading an effort on a new statewide accounting financial effort that will save the state money over the long term. I cut my own budget 10% last year with no real change in anything. I'd say arguably we have the most challenging year we've ever had in my office, and we're getting everything done. So there are things we can do in cuts. I do think we are going to have to raise taxes, but as I said, we cannot raise taxes enough to get out of the mess without driving people and businesses further out of our state. And honestly, I don't know anybody on either side of the aisle that would vote to take our taxes up to 8%.
Do you foresee any,
And so finally, to finish my question, the answer, I believe that we need to look at some things that will help get our economy growing, that will help broaden our tax base, and help get revenue in the state. I do believe that there is common ground on a lot of the things that has been put on the table, and if people will stop focusing on what divides us and instead focus on where we can agree, I think we could get some of those done.
do you
what about-
foresee any situation July 1st moving forward without a budget where your office would not be able to make timely payments on the bonds?
We are prioritizing those bonds. So we have cash that comes into the state every single day, and we never really run out of money. It's really a question of prioritizing what we pay on any given day. And we have put a priority on making sure that the dates that are ordered by the courts are met, that our debt is paid on time, and then the other obligations of the state that fall in timely, that have to be paid within a certain time period, but not necessarily on a specific pay.
What would have to follow
Everyone
up, ma'am?
keep-
What would have to happen in order
I'm
for
sorry,
that?
I'm
what-
going out here.
Go ahead.
Could, there's been so much talk of nothing's going to happen until November, until after the election. What are you saying if that's the case?
Honestly, it's irresponsible to put politics ahead of getting a budget in place. It is the constitutional duty of those in Springfield to pass a balanced budget. We failed to do it last year. We need to do it now. Certainly, if we cannot get a balanced budget in place, there is a stopgap budget that has been put on the table. That would be minimally critical to help us continue on what we need to be doing this year. That plus funding education, those two things would help us limp along. but I will say limp, because not having a budget in place does not really help the social service organizations that are trying to figure out what services they can provide this year. They need to plan and budget, just like any of us do in our own homes or in organizations in our businesses. So it will help us. A stopgap would be better than nothing. It would help us pay the vendors who have been waiting all year for payment, and that includes a lot of our social services. It helps get us through the next few months. It does not provide a plan for spending. It is not a long-term solution.
What effects?
Speaking of July, will you attend the Republican convention, and do you support Donald Trump as the nominee?
It is not on my schedule to attend the convention at this time. My priority is on the state. And currently, that will be right in the middle of beginning not having a budget in place, and I think my services are needed here. And I'm really focused 100% right now on my duties as a state and not on things that I cannot control.
What effect will today's Moody's downgrade have on this mess?
Well, it certainly does not help the matter. I think the Moody's credit, the bond ratings are a reflection of the riskiness of loaning money to the state of Illinois. And the fact that we are finishing up 1 year without a budget and that we are about to enter a next year without a budget certainly makes us look riskier. It just, I think, speaks to the incredible need for everyone to focus together on doing what they're elected to do, which is to collaboratively work together to put a budget in place and pass it before our fiscal year begins.
Given that you're the one
The
who writes
lawsuit
it that you mentioned with the 82 service providers, you're named in that lawsuit, right? So why not agree to an expedited, schedule in court and get it heard? The way it is now, it's not till the next month. You're saying some of those same service providers are closing. Don't you have any options and,
I've been named in, I don't even know how many, 70 some odd suits at this point. Those get handled through the Attorney General's office, and they come up as quickly as they can. We are paying everyone we can as quickly as we can. I'd like to remind you all that one of the big issues that we have is we are frankly out of money we pay as much as we can on any given day. We have to wait till the next day, and simply an order that allows us to legally make a payment does not mean that we can make the payment, because we have to have the cash available to make it, and we have a number of other obligations lined up. Medicaid payments that are usually over $1 billion every time we make a payment. Our contributions into the pension fund, which are about $560 million every single month. All these things add up, and it is literally, we perform triage every day in our office, trying to keep as many things paid as we can. So we will deal with those. We are paying everyone as quickly as we can.
Would you advise school districts around the state to have a lawsuit ready to go at this point?
I'm hoping that we don't get to that point. I think everyone on both sides of the aisle certainly understands the critical nature of needing to open our schools on time, and I believe that we will have people working together to get that funded.
How much longer will paychecks to legislators be delayed as a result of another year without a budget?
I put the paychecks for the legislators and the constitutional officers, including myself, in the line with the other bills, because as we continue to run the state with such a long, high backlog of bills, by running the payroll and issuing those checks on time, essentially meant I was prioritizing our salaries over everybody else who we owe in the state. And I felt like it was wrong that those of us who are sent to serve the state should be prioritized over those whose tax dollars are paying our salaries. So as for now, I intend to continue that until we get to a point where the backlog of bills we have is a normal amount, and then it will be paid within a normal 30-day routine, and we will be back on time.
So what's a normal amount, for the backlog?
Well, it depends on what our state revenues and bills are, but it's somewhere between $2 and $3 billion would be a normal amount of bills in the state. If you think you have a budget of revenues of $32 billion, you're about $2.5. So $1 billion a month would be a normal amount if you're paying your bills on time. So we're currently at a little over 7, and we have a lot of things that we are not paying, and we need to work those down to get so that we can pay everyone in the state on a timely basis.
So
Yeah,
can you
but
put,
that
can
you're
you
the
put
one who writes the
July
checks.
1st in some perspective so that the average Joe can understand what July 1st will mean as it approaches?
On July 1st, if we start our fiscal year without a budget, we will continue to make payments ordered under all the court orders, consent decrees, and the continuing appropriations that we have been running our state under. However, throughout this fiscal year, there have been a number of additional appropriations that have been made through separate legislation as they came up throughout the year. Those revert back to zero. That legislation was in place for fiscal 16, those go away. So local government payments, our schools, as I discussed, the payments to the federal pass-through payments that we're able to make, and then the higher education payments, student MAP grants, all that funding will pay what has been authorized. Even the amount that we have not yet paid, it was authorized in this fiscal year. We will continue to make those payments into the beginning of next fiscal year as we catch up those payments. But new payments coming in fiscal 17, we will not be able to make without the legal authority to issue those.
So it's an
One more
accounting
question.
issue as opposed to anything real that anybody's gonna feel?
It's not an accounting issue. So domestic violence shelters and local government 911 fees that were passed last December that allowed us to make payments legally, that goes away. So starting any payments for those, just as an example, July 1st, any new bills that would come in, we will not be able to pay domestic violence shelters. We will not be able to send money to the local governments in 911 fees. We will go back to not having to pay the lottery winners. All these things that were passed allowing, I can only make payments on behalf of the state with the legal authority to make a payment, which a budget normally gives us, the voucher, and the money. So we have a lot of issues with the money, but first we need the legal authority. And without a budget in place, those things that don't fall under a continuing appropriation or a court order or something, those items provide us a legal authority. Without those, anything that was passed through separate legislation in this fiscal year, those revert back to zero. So no payments. I think there'll be a lot of organizations saying, wait, I was getting paid. How come I can't be paid now? It's because we don't have the legal authority to make payments in a new fiscal year without a budget in place.
So
So
to
was it
clarify the
23
question that I had
billion?
earlier, is there any scenario where your hands would be tied on these debt payments? Can you envision any scenario?
No, I can envision no scenario on the debt payments because we have money coming in every day. And I, as the comptroller, have the authority to operate within, some window to make sure that the critical things that are funded in the state. And paying our debt is one of the things that we are prioritizing, along with the court orders to be paid on specific pay dates. Funding our pensions. I did have to, as I'll remind you, I'll delay a pension payment last November for cash purposes, which we did make up this spring. Those pension contributions are fully funded at this point for the fiscal year, so we can move a couple things around a little, and we will do that to ensure that our debt payments are made on time.
Thank you.
And you may just want, the 911, you're collecting that money, then I don't get why you can't use that money to pay for what you're
Because
supposed to.
we do not have the legal authority. I cannot just release funds, even if I want to, from the state, because, and it would be a bad precedent to set, frankly, to have the comptroller just deciding to release funds to anyone who I felt was a needy organization. I have to have the legal authority to release those funds. They don't fall under a court order or continuing appropriation. They fall under legislation. The legislation has to be passed. Thank you all very much for your time.
Oh, can you tell us about this hotline?
Sure. So if there are questions about the budget, we've had a budget hotline going all year. It's 1-855-IL-ASK-US. It gets you directly to someone in my office. Those phones are answered by live people. We get over 5,000 phone calls a week on funding, where funding is, if people are getting their tax returns, where they are, who can get paid when, anything. And so people can reach out to us and reach someone in our Consumer Affairs group through reaching that number. Okay, thank you very much.